Hello again, fellow woers, it's Kev off of LandroeGaming, episode 2 of the new LandroeGaming format. As I mentioned in my previous video, I've hit 85 and I've kept my XP at 85 and I'm waiting to buy Mists of Pandaria. Quickly mentioning something there, as you can see there's a new element to World of Warcraft where you can select a specific rep from a daily dungeon. So once a day you can select this rep and you can apply it to whichever rep you choose and you'll get additional reputation when you complete that dungeon. Now what I've done upon clicking for this Stormstag Brewery, I was practicing the video of showing you how you go about selecting this this bonus reputation tab, and the dungeon popped up and I actually clicked the dungeon to accept, and I must have clicked off my reputation tab, as you'll see at the end of the dungeon. So lesson learned there, be very, very careful, make sure it is actually highlighted when you shut down that reputation menu. The one that you have selected is obviously the one that's highlighted. You noticed briefly at the start of the video there, when I enter this dungeon, it's not the best dungeon to showcase my new setup because of the way that the camera angle's a bit, you have to be quite close or else you just see the top of a wall. So hopefully you can see my sort of Druid playstyle, but you just caught a glimpse of it there. The red that a character goes means they haven't got my buff, and that's a buff set up through Healbot. I've got a Healbot tutorial video. It's a couple of patches old, but Healbot is pretty much the same. It's exactly the same setup procedures. However, the main additional start menu has changed from a sort of horizontal layout to a vertical layout. The menus are the same, the way you change things are the same, the way you position it the same, so the tutorial is still relevant. It's just there's been a couple of changes in there. Now, I find Druids very, very fun to play. I mean, there's great potential in PvP. The way that the hot mechanic works, you're susceptible if you get spammed, if you get CC'd, and your healing target or yourself gets spammed, dispelled. Obviously, Life Bloom is what our protection, effectively our protection. It's important that whatever target is being focused has Life Bloom up, particularly in PvP. In PvE, you obviously, majority of the time you want on the tank because of the consistent damage the tank takes, the consistent way that Life Bloom heals is a very quick heal, of a moderate amount of healing, but it's consistent, so it keeps the tank topped up. It's in essence, it's your powered shield equivalent from those that watched me whilst I played my priest. The other spells at your disposal are pretty straightforward. You've got your rejuvenation, you've got healing touch, you've got nourish, which is your mana efficient heal. You've got various other types of heals. And I'm getting used to using healing touch because obviously that's going to be, for the most part, one you'd use in PvPing. And even though I'm doing PvE here, it's a good place to practice things that you try and incorporate into your PvP. As you can see, I've set up all my keybinds across the bottom of the screen here. 1 through to 0 and F1 through to F12 and various keybinds in between. Now what that is important for is in PvP and high-end PvE, you haven't got a chance to think, oh, what button do I press? You have to do it instinctively. The situation that arises needs this spell, and you need to do it instinctively without thinking. I think the way that I play, you probably wouldn't be able to do if you weren't, or if you couldn't touch type, I should say, because you need to hit the keys on your keyboard without looking down. You can't take your eyes off the screen. So if you can't touch type, then that's probably why a multi-button mouse would be beneficial. You'd learn the same principles of touch typing, but you'd be doing it just on a mouse. If you can touch type, you're in a huge advantage for this kind of gaming. And I think that's quite an important point to make. As I said, in some of the upcoming videos I'm going to discuss how I game and how I play the game, and there'll be some video of me playing and some correlating video of gameplay, so you can see how I integrate my left hand and my right hand. Do not keyboard turn. Do not use the arrows on your keyboard to turn. You need to use a combination of striking with your Q and the E or your mouse, and a combination of the both. So that's something we'll look at. And I'm not entirely sure. I'm still learning Druid. I'm learning on the go here. So I've got my mushrooms, as you can see, which have had a buff in 5.2 where rejuvenation gives them some additional healing. The overhealing of rejuvenation gets kind of transferred into your mushrooms, and then when you use your mushroom bloom, which is the very big heal, substantial heal, it's a lot more now once they've been empowered by the rejuvenation overheal. As you can see on my UI, you get an indicator to show it's at max strength, but I suppose theoretically you don't need to use them at max strength if the situation arises where the healing is kind of moderate and they're not at max strength. Then you could theoretically bloom your mushrooms in that sense. It's going to be a fun mechanic to play with. I was playing around with it in this dungeon because it's the first time I've had the spell whilst in an instance. And one of the things worth noting is that the positioning of your tank can be a problem. He will inevitably move where the mobs move, which is, obviously fine. So you have to, as a healer, think kind of 1 or 2 steps ahead. Where are they going to be when that damage occurs? Very, very hard. But I suppose there's going to be certain bosses, certain raid environments where you can predict to a certain degree just what's going to happen in terms of the damage incoming compared to where the position of the raid or tanks will be, so you can maximise the bloom effect of your mushrooms. But yeah, there's lots of interesting mechanics. Wild Growth is a very good AoE heal. You've got a couple of damage reduction abilities. You've got the one that you use on yourself, which is Bark Skin, which is the famed one that Druids have had for quite a long time. You've got Iron Bark, which is a restoration specific, I do believe, ability, and that's something that you'll obviously put on somebody who's taking a spike or consistent amount of damage, normally the tanks for the most part. It's probably a cooldown that will be used to mitigate certain instances, certain boss mechanics. But in a PvP environment, again, if somebody's going to be focused, that can be used on them. You can use it on yourself. Unlike Bark Skin, it can't be used whilst feared or stunned, etc. So Bark Skin will still be your ability of choice as first port of call. If Bark Skin's on cooldown or if there's an insane amount of damage, not always recommended to double dip your 2 damage mitigation abilities. This is from something that I learned quite early in the game, that if somebody has, for example, a pain suppression and a Bark Skin, it doesn't mean they're going to get 60% damage reduction. How it works is they'll get 40% off the initial damage, and then whatever's left, i.e. you've got 10,000 damage incoming, you've got a pain suppression on said target, the 10,000 will become a 6,000 hit, and then you get your Bark Skin comes into play and you get 20% off of that remaining 6,000. So it's worth remembering how damage mitigation cooldowns work, and if you do stack them, you're not going to get bam and outright 40% reduction. However, there's the old saying that I kind of coined early on in my PvP days: do not die with the cooldown still available. So if somebody's going to die, and if you're going to die and you've got Iron Bark available and Bark Skin's on, but you're still not thinking you're going to survive, use Iron Bark, keep yourself alive. That's priority. Do not die, and especially don't die with the cooldown available. That's me just going off on a tangent there from my old school days as a priest. And basically, as I was saying, this dungeon I used primarily just to get used to the new mechanics that I've learned from becoming 85, the new spells I've learned at my disposal, my UI setup, which I've kept the same throughout my days WoWing. This is pretty much exactly the same UI setup that I had as my priest. I have removed Bartender, which is something I use. It's very, very good. I've not got a bad word to say about Bartender. But I thought I'll start with one less UI add-on to start with and see how it affects my gameplay, and see just how my resources cope with a new change to my setup. And I use Bartender primarily because I was using an old school monitor which was 4:3 screen ratio, aspect ratio, so it was a squarer screen, and I didn't have all this space down the sides. You see my bottom right, I've got my heal bar, on the bottom left I've got my chat. When I was using my old monitor, I had to maximise the squareness of the monitor, so Bartender enabled me to squeeze my UI into a smaller rectangle in the middle of the screen, so I could effectively make my 4:3 a widescreen monitor, in so much as I could fit things down the side of my UI. Now I've upgraded to the widescreen monitor, that doesn't necessarily need to happen, so there's no problem with this UI really. My heal bar and my button timers, which are the other 2 UIs that you see to the right of my character, I like to have them very close to my character. It's a way I've sort of grown up playing the game, being able to see my character where it's standing, being come in danger, as well as my mouse being relatively close means that things that you might not notice that are happening if your UI was sort of right down the bottom of your screen or over to the left, you pick up on straight away. So that's just a personal preference. You set up your UI, your screen layout exactly how you want it to be. There's little things that I'm still working out. My keybinds, I think I've got them how I'd like them. There's a few that I'll probably change. There's a few that aren't actually keybound yet. A particularly useful one obviously being shadow mail. At the moment I have to click that, which isn't the smartest, and certainly won't be viable come end game or if I want to get a decent ranking in PvP. So it's important that from that perspective you get your keybinds sorted as early as possible, so that, as I mentioned earlier on, that you do them on instinct. You know where the key bind is without having to really think, oh, what key was I had that bound to, whereabouts is that on my keyboard. So it's important to remember. This dungeon was quite an interesting one. Obviously it's old school now, it's been done probably a million times by a million different people, but if you go there as a different character, it's a new learning curve, because you're relearning when your cooldowns are used, you're relearning how you play a certain encounter, and it's practice. I found that running instances continuously is a really good way to practice your character. The added benefit of the new reputation change, which I actually messed up on this instance, I'll explain more on that at the end of the video, but that's huge as well, because I could grind dungeons all day and I do not get bored with it. I could literally play dungeons 24/7. I enjoy the camaraderie of the people. I'll always inevitably at the end say, oh, thanks for playing, you might appear on LandroeGaming, as these guys will. Not that it's a huge thing, but it's really nice to watch yourself play back sometimes. So I like the social aspect of instances, and I can grind them all day. When Mr. Pandaria hit and Warcraft changed to the daily grind, it wasn't for me, and that was probably the reason that I actually stopped playing. That was why I quit playing WoW. It was a burden. I didn't want to have to log on every day to do my dungeons to keep up with the rest of the raiders. Now they've incorporated into this sort of element of dungeons. I wouldn't mind logging and doing a dungeon every day, because I quite like dungeons. I would have liked it to have been like the Wrath of the Lich King days, when you could put on a tabard and if you so inclined wanted to do it via dungeons, then you could. But I can understand why Blizzard changed that, because it is to a certain degree easier. Now the problem that Blizzard made for themselves was the amount of rep that you got from a dungeon. You could grind dungeons non-stop and get quite a lot of rep for each relevant faction, which meant you didn't have to do the dailies. What they could have done is made it so that the dailies were maybe a slightly quicker way of doing it, but the tabard option was there for those that don't like the daily grind. So I'm not a huge fan of questing. It's one of my gripes of the game. I like to level through PvP and through instances and that kind of thing. That said, there's some good questing zones, particularly Oldham. Don't get me wrong, there's some good questing zones, but I'm not a huge fan of them. That's personal preference. I should be able to choose the way that I play this game, and I think that was where Blizzard went slightly wrong, particularly towards the end of Cataclysm and start of Mr. Pandaria. They made it, this is the way you're going to do it, you have no choice, you're going to have to grind daily to get to this point, to get this gear, etc, etc, etc. And probably that, some people might have become happy with that, that's absolutely fine, but some people might have thought, well, I don't want to play the game this way, I should choose to play the game that I want to play, the way that I want to play it. So they're balancing that out, and this dungeon change is definitely one of those ways of balancing it out. So kudos to Blizzard. They kind of maybe saw the error of their way, or decided that it would be good to please as many people as possible rather than just a niche of the game. The interesting thing with Druids is the diversity in play style. They're obviously a raid healer because of the amount of healing they can do across a raid. They've got quite good utility in PvP. I'm quite happy with how they perform in PvP. The biggest gripe I had with priests was the mobility issues. I mean, I always used to grumble about how warriors could train them because of their main gap giver was Psychic Scream, and obviously Berserker Rage was on a shorter cooldown than Psychic Scream, so warriors could effectively train a priest, and a priest relied entirely on peels. One thing I've noticed with a druid is they are going to need peels, but they have a certain amount of leeway in their own arsenal of spells, particularly disentanglement, several speed increases, ways to flip form to change the angle of their play style. For example, if you are caught by a melee and you don't have any way of freeing yourself, then you could obviously flip there and pop a few cooldowns in that sense. So it is interesting. There's a lot to to a Druid. I think to master it as a class must take a serious amount of time. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to getting into Mr. Pandaria and leveling and seeing what goes on. As I mentioned previously before, there's a few things. The bartender was the one thing, and it just came to me just then as I was mentioning about different forms. That was one of the problems with bartender, that it might be an option that is usable, and if it is, please comment on the video. But the problem I had with Druids whilst using bartender was when I switched forms, the UI at the bottom, your sort of spell UI, didn't actually change. So whereas I could have a keybind that does something, for example, keybind number 1. When I'm in cat form, it's a pounce, say, whilst I'm stealthed. I come out of stealth and it will be a different spell, it'll be attack. I come out of, I go into bear form and it will be, frenzied regeneration. And I flip to healer form and it's suddenly life bloom. That's one keybind, then without any modifiers does all those things by switching form. Now I found with bartender that wasn't the case. Whatever you set as number 1, it was the same in all forms. And when you're switching forms and gaining different spells from each form, it obviously made it quite tricky. That was another decision that led me to not use bartender. As I said, it's a wonderful add-on. I did have some fantastic abilities and some fantastic use of it, especially in raiding. It cleared the clutter of my screen, but I thought this time was a bit different. And that's basically all I can say. This is episode 2, so it's a podcast combined with some general rambling and some gameplay footage, and it's going to be one of the elements of LandroeGaming. There's lots of ways I'm going to incorporate different types of things, but the podcast type thing is going to be, I want people to watch videos and like I do, watch videos whilst they game, watch videos whilst they're at work, watch videos whilst they're sort of laying in the bath, which isn't the smartest thing, because I use it on my my mobile phone, but it's quite cool. And I want the videos to appeal to lots of different people, so I'll leave the last little boss fight to become some music for you to enjoy, hopefully, and enjoy your time working. There'll be another few videos coming out next week. As I said, I aim to get 1 or 2 videos out every week, and I'll do it as a consistent episode format. So it'll go from episode 1 to episode 2 all the way through, so people can come in at any point, they can watch the back catalogue, they can go to the Healthy Gaming community and look at what's happening on there, and all the videos will form a homogenistic, linked up series of hopefully interesting life as a gamer. Landro out.